Next up, I'll be joining Chris Denning and Brian Katula to discuss the recent tabletop exercise we held to assess organizations' resilience after a simulated Wiperware incident. We'll cover some takeaways and surprising findings from those two exercises that include many hundreds of banks, credit unions, and payment processors. Please enter your questions in the Zoom Q&A tab as we go. We will also be sending out slides after the meeting, so keep that in mind. We'll be moving quickly through slides at some points. Let's go ahead and get started. Chris, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda slide, if you don't mind. All right. So to provide you with the background necessary and as a review for those who participated in the exercise, we're going to go over a few things. First, we're going to give you an overview of what the BRC and ORF are to kind of set the tone of why we did this exercise. Then we'll go over the exercise itself, including the objective, conditions, scenario, and injects, and then finally our key findings. At the end of our presentation, we'll go over some of our upcoming BRC events and activities, invite you to join us, and provide you with our contact information. As Mark said, we will be posting a recording of this presentation. So if it goes too fast for you at points, don't worry, it'll be available. And we'll also be providing you with a copy of our slides. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so just to introduce you to who the BRC is and why we developed and conducted the ACH payment disruption exercise, we first wanted to point out what the GRF Business Resilience Council is. The Global Resilience Federation owns, operates, or supports a total of 17 information sharing communities. The Business Resilience Council acts as a hub for collaborative defense and resilience and multi-sector sharing across these and other communities. We see it as an important adjunct to any existing community or association, and it is the means by which all our cross-sector projects, including this exercise, are built. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to brief all this slide, but the six, I guess, boxes that you see here, these are our areas of major emphasis, or pillars as we like to call them. Two of those include exercises and also our member-driven Operational Resilience Working Group. It was in the Operational Resilience Working Group that this exercise was conceived, developed, and refined. Let's go to the next slide and I'll pass it over to Mark.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so starting from guidance from the Bank of England in 2018, regulatory bodies like the OCC, FFIC, FDIC, and others have made operational resilience a focal point of guidance. Through the ORF, we're working to extend business continuity management practices to take into account potential systemic impacts and an outward-facing lens on services provided to customers. Our mission is to reduce operational risk, to minimize service disruptions, and to limit systemic impacts from destructive attacks and adverse events. This is accomplished through a 7-step path, 36 high-level rules that are easy to follow, a maturity model, implementation aids, and exercises. And all of this can be found on our website, and you can see the link here, the grfbrc.org/ORF. Next slide. There are several key principles in the framework. We define a new role that spans business and technology, the Operational Resilience Executive. This individual is given the authority and is charged with the responsibility for operational resilience. They must sustain efforts through organizational and business changes. We define the difference between operations critical and business critical services. Only a few services rise to the level of operations critical. Those that need near continuous functioning, and those that, if you suffer a disruption, it'll impact your customers and partners and potentially have wider disruptive implications. And we have minimum viable service levels. This is a key definition and an important concept that Phil Venables will discuss in his session. The minimum viable service level is the lowest possible level of service where it is still useful to your customers and business partners. The concept of minimum viable service levels is new. The 2018 Bank of England paper focused on impact tolerance, and we turn that definition on its head to say, at what point does the service break for customers? What is the minimum viable service level? It's an informal SLA, and you need to understand it and understand your customers and what's essential to them and where that service breaks. And of primary importance is also the expanded definition of critical data sets. This is not just business and customer data where controls have tremendous regulatory scrutiny, but all the other data required to stand up your operations critical systems in a crisis. This is your Active Directory, applications, system images, and other data. And the good news is that all the major cloud providers have inexpensive and effectively immutable ways to store that data. And finally, we must exercise and independently test our implementation. Exercises like the one discussed here today are essential to inform us of our resilience capability and maturity. Next slide. This brings us to the joint paper between GRF and NACHA. We took 5 key rules from the Operational Resilience Framework and used them to enhance operational resilience for ACH network participants. These 5 measures will significantly mitigate the impact of a disruption to nearly $75 trillion of electronic payments carried over the ACH network. ODFIs, RDFIs, and third-party service providers should consider the application of these measures to their operations. You can find out more using the link on this page. Thanks again to Bill Nelson and the whole team at NACHA for helping to write this report. Chris, you're up.
Thank you, Mark. With that background, let's go to the next slide. All right, and so we're going to jump into talking about our presentation on the ACH payments disruption tabletop exercise and the key findings from that exercise. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk about our objectives. So as you can read on the left there, our tabletop exercise objectives were to, number 1, increase awareness of operational resilience in the ACH community and financial sector itself. Number 2 was to share operational resilience maturity across participants for select operational resilience framework rules to increase, sector awareness of where everybody else is at and to measure where they're at in comparison. We did ask, just for some color here, our participants for their definition of business critical services. And if you look on the right there, you'll see some of those responses. The larger, the more bold those responses or the more frequent they were, the more bold and larger they appear there. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. So the conditions for our exercise were as follow. This exercise was developed by our Operational Resilience Framework Working Group and was held twice, once on March 17th and another on April 19th. 19th and 17th. I got that backwards. It was directed and led by Bill Nelson, GRF chair, and facilitated by Derek Rowan and his team at Accentra, as well as by GRF's Mark Orsi. Panelists provided expertise pertaining to the scenario, and each inject then responded to data from participants to provide insight and perspective on that data. Our panelists were Trey Most, at Lewis and Clark Bank, Bob Blakely at Team 8, Mark Harvey at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, as well as not just Michael Hurd, Devin Marsh, Jordan Bennett, and Amy Morris. Let's go to the next slide. Mark.
Yeah, so here we just talk about some of the demographics of those that participated. The bubbles on the left, the larger bubble means we had more participants in that group. So for instance, commercial banks, less than 500 million was the largest cohort. And we had banks going all the way up to greater than 50 billion. And we had a large number of credit unions, some core processors, and a bucket of other participants. And if we look at the roles, the largest roles that we had participating were operations, IT, and the risk continuity and compliance group. We also had some treasury management, communications, and a few other folks participating. Chris.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to go over the scenario and the injects to provide those who participate in the exercise with a quick review, and for those of you who maybe didn't participate in that exercise, for an overview to kind of give you an idea of what the scenario and what those injects were that we ran throughout this exercise. So let's go on to the main scenario. Actually, go back one. Was a hacking group coined Purple Rain had been increasing attacks and capability over the past 6 months using phishing attacks to inject malware that would lay dormant for weeks or months before activation. Their malware was found to be capable of compromising applications of core operations providers as well as their backups. So let's go on to the next slide. We'll start talking about injects. So day one injects, you can read them there. They started with participant systems supporting automated clearinghouse operations, sending and receiving payments, becoming inaccessible. That was followed by FBI communications indicating that a malware attack, including Wiperware, was erasing ACH systems and their backups. That was causing disruption of payment of multiple customer and business systems. Let's go to the next slide. Day two saw the number of organizations unable to originate or receive payments spreading, with regulators imposing reporting requirements for impacted institutions, ACH transactions failing, and news outlets becoming interested, contacting your organizations for information. Let's go to the next slide. On day five, we saw a lot of action still. The FBI reported that more than 700 financial institutions were impacted on day one, with 250 institutions still not processing ACH transactions. They reported that some of the FIs requested federal assistance and that each participant's organization was able to resume operations. And that when I say participations, our exercise participants were able to resume their operations. However, they also discovered their data, meaning their customer information, transit routing, demand deposit, and savings account data was being sold on the dark web. Let's go to the next slide. On day five, we also learned that Purple Rain had been conducting disinformation campaigns on social media to reduce consumer confidence while shorting stocks. Purple Rain adapted their tactics during this time period and began a DDoS campaign, preventing 75% of our customers from accessing their online banking. And to top it all off, our contracted forensic incident response consultant claims the attack is outside his or her contract. So that's a nice curveball thrown in there. That was a lot, but our members believed it was a realistic scenario that would challenge any organization. So we conducted it, we gathered data, and we're going to move on to the next slide where I'll turn it over to Brian to go over some of those key findings. Brian.
Yeah, hey, Chris, just before Brian gets started, I wanted to just discuss the findings. The numbers that we'll talk about, some of the statistics that we'll talk about, were collected anonymously based upon session ID of people that participated. So there may be some things that were counted twice, for instance, and other things. We're working hard to clean that up in our final after action report. What you're seeing here is some preliminary findings, and then we will sort of clean them up a little bit better as we go along. But go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Mark. So on the screen here, we have several key takeaways that I'd like you to keep in mind as we go over some of the data and other key findings. On the top left corner, you see one of our key findings includes operational resilience challenges. Among the challenges we saw were some interesting parallels between the current status of the smallest and largest organizations that participated, despite wildly different organizational challenges, such as resource constraints or complexity. Additionally, we noticed a very heavy dependence on third parties to achieve a number of the resilience objectives that were put forward in the scenario. Another one of our key takeaways included a certain insufficiency in the tech and approaches banks took to achieve the operational resilience throughout the scenario. Finally, we will go over some recommendations and please go on to the next slide. So our first key finding is operational resilience challenges. We found that only 41% roughly had service delivery objectives that were capable of meeting minimum viable service levels. This number is on the lower end of what we're hoping to achieve in the near future. But what was remarkable about this is that there was a clear disparity between the medium and medium-sized organizations and the smallest and largest organizations. The smallest and largest organizations ranged into about 30 to 40% answering yes to this question, while the medium to medium-sized organizations were mostly above the 50% mark. This could indicate a number of issues, including challenges with the high volume and organizational complexity that large organizations face, as well as small organizations facing resource limitations or starting on the operational resilience a little bit later than larger organizations. Our next key finding was around the service levels. We had only 24% roughly of banks and credit unions stating that they had different service level objectives for origination versus receiving. We find this interesting because operational resilience dictates that our service levels be based on operational capabilities and the abilities that we have to deliver those services, as well as minimum viable service levels. Origination and receiving might pose several different challenges, and so we would expect a more mature organization to have different service levels for origination versus receiving. Again, we found that the smallest and largest organizations here fell behind the middle of the pack, with the organizations in the $1 to $5 billion asset range being the most mature in this area. Additionally, we have the key finding around immutable and distributed backups. While a large portion of our participants did state they had immutable and distributed backups, we once again found that the smallest and largest organizations were lagging behind ever so slightly, with the middle of the pack around 90% in terms of asset size, around 90%, and the smallest and largest organizations closer to 70% in terms of immutable and distributed backups. I'll additionally add that a number of our responses indicated that they had either immutable or distributed backup solutions, and that there's always room for improvement in this area. Next slide, please. Our next key finding is around the heavy dependence on third parties to achieve resilience objectives. 3 have been included here on this slide, including data dependencies, service resilience dependencies, and failure remediation dependencies. Many, in this day and age, cloud-based data restoration solutions are very common, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, we did notice a very heavy dependence on them. In a large-scale scenario like this, many of those vendors are going to be overwhelmed with the number of requests they're receiving, communications may be challenging, and the resilience objectives in place may not necessarily always be achievable. We would like the next one, service resilience dependencies. While 69.6% of banks and 79.7% of credit unions did believe they'd be able to meet ACH deadlines during this crisis, the majority of those, over 68%, said they would be depending upon core processors and third parties in order to meet those obligations, which is interesting, especially considering that 2/3 roughly of our core processors that were participating said that they would be likely be unable to meet those deadlines during the crisis. Additionally, the failure remediation dependencies. Nearly all participants were going to be stated they were going to be dependent on third parties or core processors in order to remediate failed transactions. Failed meaning either they were never received, did not get originated properly, were corrupted in transit, however it might have occurred. And so this is an interesting finding that states that we need to be increasingly careful how we deal with our third parties and the requirements we place on them. Next slide, please. We also found that there was a number of ways in which our methods were insufficient. 45% of our respondents did not have tools to identify the level of impairment in their ACH systems. This is important, and you can see the word cloud here indicating the methods they would be using, the tools that were used in the 55% that did have tools. The ability to identify the level of impairment in your ACH processes or truly any service that you wish to make resilient is very important because it is a key metric by which you can make decisions about which service level objectives to implement, which alternative processes are necessary, what steps need to be taken, what communications need to be made. Additionally, 90% said there were unintended consequences from this event. Now, it's a tabletop exercise. Of course, there's going to be unintended consequences. But the point we'd like to point out here is that Ideally, you are making resilience plans based on how a service can fail. You are going to look at all of the different ways that it could fail rather than the things that could make it fail and plan around that. In this way, there would be significantly fewer unintended consequences because you know that this service can be overwhelmed by volume. So you can plan around that rather than planning around a DDoS attack, for example. You can also see a word cloud here about what some of those unintended consequences were, including dependencies, customer trust, a number of people not sure, but there were a number of unintended consequences. Moving on to the next key finding. More than half of the participants were not employing DDoS remediation services that enabled valid customer access to their online banking platforms. In the face of a disruption, delivering service is what operational resilience is all about. And so whether they had alternative methods to achieve this, over half of the organizations were not able to deliver their online banking platform to valid customers. Many of the orgs were using insufficient validation methods for ensuring dataset extracts as well. And I'm not talking insufficient as in not meeting current standards. They were meeting sufficient standards for current BCM practices, but to achieve proper operational resilience, the methods were not quite sufficient. The ORF says that a dataset extract is not considered a dataset extract until it has been validated and then properly stored in your immutable and distributed backup solution. Now, this method might be a little more onerous and require automation, but we believe it is possible for at least the most critical data, including your network application configuration and other data that supports a critical service during a disruption. Next slide, please. Next, I'll be getting into some recommendations. We recommend that you strengthen your third-party risk management, and in particular, we're focusing on operational resilience. Many of our resilience-based objectives that participants were exposed to were solved through third-party means, which means your third parties need to be as resilient as you hope to be. This is a situation where the weakest link in the chain will bring you down, and so you need to strengthen that third-party risk management and operational resilience capability in order to achieve proper resilience. We also recommend that you employ an operational resilience framework. We have a wonderful one that is both award-winning for its effectiveness and impact and industry-driven. We hope you check that one out, but if you have your own, or if you have another organizations that you would like to employ, we recommend that you just have at least an operational resilience framework. This is also something that might help strengthen your third-party risk management in that you can recommend that they get an operational resilience framework or even have certain requirements around operational resilience maturity based on the ORF maturity model that is available at our website. We also recommend you enhance your testing and simulation exercise programs. 73.2% of our respondents had not previously exercised a scenario similar to this, which was destructive ACH scenarios. Now, this is a very specific question, so it's understandable that the answer or the no group is quite large. However, it does indicate that there is a lack in diversity of the scenarios being exercised today. Our next recommendation is to depend on expertise before group consensus, unless you have a group of experts, in which case there's a blend of the two that can work. We had a number of participants that were voting to come to consensus or in other ways not leveraging optimal strategies. It is best to depend on expertise because it is not always the loudest voice in the room that knows the best solution. Next slide, please. Further, continuing the recommendations, we recommend that you can improve your communication strategies. Many of the solutions proposed in the tabletop exercise included reaching out to third parties, calling in your staff, and in other ways communicating that are absolutely critical for operational resilience. Whether it's strengthening your ability to deliver strengthening your ability to deliver those communications during an exercise or during a scenario, or improving your messaging to incorporate operational resilience or transparency increases, we recommend that you strengthen those strategies to ensure that you achieve proper operational resilience, especially for your third parties and your critical employees. Next, sending some staff home. So one of the things that can really make or break a response is your ability to sustain effort. During the exercise, many of our respondents and participants noted things like all hands on deck or 24/7. And while that's wonderful for a shorter disruption, it can be problematic in the long term. The operational resilience framework promotes and requires that operational resilience plans take sustainability into account. So if you want to be able to sustain effort for an extended period of time, you might consider sending staff home at the beginning or in the middle of an event, a portion of the staff home in the beginning or middle of the event, to ensure that you are able to sustain that effort throughout the disruption.
Yeah, hey, Brian, I can just add to that, many of the folks that responded to unintended consequences were surprised at the secondary attack in the scenario and the extended duration of it, and really had consideration for that, that staff rest as part of a long-term impact type approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point, Mark. A final recommendation is that you implement immutable and distributed backups for your most critical data, not just user and business data, but your network, your application, your configuration, and all the data that enables you to keep operating through those disruptions. While many of the participants stated they did have immutable and distributed backups, as I mentioned earlier, this really needs to be something that everyone has in this day and age. It's very accessible through cloud solutions and a number of other methodologies. And again, not for everything, but just for the most important stuff, this must be achieved. Next slide, please. I'll hand it off to Chris.
Yep, thanks. Appreciate it. And I just wanted to reiterate, if you have questions about our exercise, about our findings, etc., please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window. And for the rest of our presentations throughout the day as well, that's the best way to get our attention and ask those questions. We promise to get to them as soon as practicable. We wanted to start wrapping this up, this particular portion of our presentation, by saying, number one, thank you for your support. NACHA really helped us develop this, writing the paper with Bill Nelson. We had 700 organizations join us for the tabletop exercise. We had many of our members join us for the ORF working group to develop the exercise, refine it, develop the injects and the overall scenario. So very much a collaborative effort, and really what we pride ourselves in doing, being able to bring together these various groups to leverage our expertise, our interests, and the questions that we all have to create products such as this exercise. We have a few items of interest for you. Number one, there was a survey for attendees. We did distribute that by email. I'm going to put it here in chat in just a second. Do encourage you. It's a big, long, ugly URL, but it's good, it's clean, it's trusted. If you participated in the actual exercise, please fill that out to give us some feedback on the exercise itself. Next, we have an ORF community tabletop exercise for the multi-sector. And it will surround the same type of scenario. We're still massaging and developing it a little bit, working with our working group, but really it's in its closing stages. We'll be holding that on September 12th. We'll be again holding that in cooperation with Centra. So those of you who saw the first round saw the quality that they're able to bring to the table, and we invite you to come and participate again. But also, while the first presentation was focused mostly on the financial sector, this one will be more directed towards everybody else and how this affects you. What happens to your organization when you can no longer make payments, receive payments, including payroll, or in addition to your accounts receivable and payable. So we think that's going to be really important and topical, maybe something that hasn't been exercised within your organizations that really ought to. And as we talked about in the scenario, it can bleed over into sections beyond just those responsible for making those payments. Next, we want to talk to you just a little bit, make you aware of our GRF Summit on Security and Third-Party Risk. That's going to be happening in November. That'll be November 13 to 14 in Orlando, Florida at the Swan and Dolphin Hotel. That is right there next to the Disney properties. Great venue. It is a place where we have a lot of practitioners come and collaborate, get to know each other, not only within their own communities, but across the multi-sectors. We have really good representation from several different sectors there. Also, a good opportunity for you to do work together as a sector, and get together for meetings afterwards. There'll be some social events there. Really look forward to it. One of our very favorite venues that we've ever used. Last, I'll put on here just an invite to join our BRC. There is a link there. You can copy that. I'll also put it into our chat, in addition to the link for registering for our multi-sector exercise, in addition to our summit in November. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please.
Hey, thanks, Chris. And Brian, I'd like you to join me here. I think this is something that we really want to everybody to participate in. We have the operational resilience framework available at the link at the bottom right. Anybody can download the framework, download the maturity model, which includes, a spreadsheet where you can answer each individual question associated with each of the rules of the operational resilience framework. It doesn't take a lot of effort to actually fill it out. Obviously it takes some coordination within your organization to try and get to the truth, the ground truth. But it's relatively quick for the folks that have knowledge of the different resources there. But what's really interesting, what we really want to do is take that information, and have it anonymously submitted from each organization to help us build a baseline. And we can build a baseline for each sector, and help you compare with others where you are in your journey to ORF maturity, to operational resilience maturity, and have that real picture of it. And as you grow, as you get better at it year over year, you can kind of compare, and we could see how the industry is maturing as a whole as well. So we're working to put together an anonymous survey that people can fill out. Once they've filled out the spreadsheet, the maturity model spreadsheet, they can take that data and dump it into a survey that you would submit anonymously that we can include in that analysis. Brian, do you want to take us kind of step by step through the process of how people would do this?
Sure, absolutely. So the first step, deciding to participate. So you should participate in order to compare your organization's maturity with the industry standards. This helps to create a lot of impact for your industry, as it helps set the bar and then provides a mechanism for you then to raise the bar. It also helps create a tailored path for you to increase your resilience up to the maturity of your industry, up to the standard of your industry, and helps, as well as using the ORF maturity model to provide that path to advance beyond your peers. Additionally, so next is to participate. You start by downloading from the link on the screen our maturity model. It should be, the third or fourth document on that page to download. And it is a relatively simple spreadsheet to navigate. You see portions of it here on the screen, including a summary of your implementation and assessment maturity. You also see the spider graph that we have indicating your maximum, average, and minimum maturities. So you can fill this out either alone or with other members of your organization. You can fill it out for your entire organization or for a single service. And you can push forward and return that to us in a survey that we'll publish in the next few months, or in the next month. Once you have submitted, we will collate everything together and send out, we will publish a report on industry benchmarks. So when can you start this? You can start it right now. You can do this anonymously, and you can, you have as much as 2 months to achieve this or to get this done. And then you can check out the report when the time comes.
Yeah, and so this is something I don't want this to be skewed with only the top organizations that have the sort of, that are down that journey, right? I think we're all feeling the regulatory pressure, especially in the financial services sector, of becoming operationally resilient. The regulators are interested in the framework that we've developed, and so we don't want this to be skewed just to the largest organizations, right? We want everybody's new to this. This is a relatively new construct. Organizations are just now developing operational resilience teams or giving that role to somebody within their organization. So it's new, and we realize that if you're filling out this maturity model, and there's a lot of learning in it, even reviewing it, even just understanding it is also going to help you highlight the things where you need to address. But submitting that data, even in your early days of maturity, actually helps everybody understand that we're early days in this. We're just starting to understand and think about these things. A lot of organizations, from just historical perspective, you've got good business continuity management programs, you've got good mechanisms to protect the business long term, but really putting that new lens, that customer and partner facing lens, those outward facing services, and the focus on that is something relatively new. A lot of the work that you've done for business continuity actually helps, and you can see where those contribute to your operational resilience. But this different lens, you can see some of those gaps, and again help us all evaluate where we are and what we need to do to get to that next level of maturity. So I really encourage everybody to do this, to start out now, and then when we can pull that data in and do an analysis and give you some feedback, it'll also help you in your you can see where you are in comparison to others. You can maybe get some support in helping you down that maturity curve as well.
Hey,
Anything else? Yeah,
Mark,
go ahead.
yeah, kind of a question. Brian had mentioned earlier in this presentation about our third parties, our partners also being resilient. Is there anything that GRF or the Business Resilience Council is doing to help organizations bring up the operational resilience of their partners, of their the vendors, the third parties that they use?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to go into this a little bit later too, Chris. I think in general, we want to be able to push this down. There's a large number of organizations. The vast majority of our economy is driven by the mid-sized organization, and 80% of the economy is driven by mid-sized organizations. And do they have the resources, separate resources for operational resilience? No. So we tried to create these rules and this whole framework in a way that everybody could benefit from it. And one way that we think we can get to the mid-sized organization is through the large organizations, through the large enterprises. When you're a large enterprise, you have thousands of vendors and suppliers, and it's up to you. You're doing assessments of them on their security and maturity, but you can also point them to resources that can help them out in their journey. And this is not yet on your NIST CSF assessment, your shared assessments assessment. I think they just had an operational resilience module put in last year. So it's new. It's something new, and it's something we need to inform mid-sized organizations about, and about that it's coming, and give them these tools that can help them see the gaps and help them down that journey as well. All right, why don't we go ahead to the next slide, Chris?
Yeah, so we wanted to provide you with our contact information. If you've got general questions about the Business Resilience Council, our efforts, membership, etc., you've got Bill Nelson and my email addresses there. Please reach out. You also have, if you have questions specifically about sponsoring or becoming a member, you can reach out to Jason Beard. His email address is there. And then if you have questions about the ORF, we do recommend you reach out to either Brian Katula or Mark Orsi, and their emails are there. We do want to give another shout out to all those who participated. Our working group, it was comprised of members, who came together because they were interested in this topic, who worked and shared, a lot of information about, their concerns as it pertains to operational resilience, concerns they've experienced in their places of employment, perhaps in previous places of employment, or by looking over the horizon, as Secretary Nielsen mentioned in the previous discussion. And they brought that forward, knowing that doing so was going to help lift all of us up and all of our awareness up. And that's the type of project that we can do here at the Business Resilience Council. Anyhow, we put it together. And then we had a center help us to refine and develop the presentation to run the exercise itself. And we just can't be more grateful to them and the part that they took in presenting that exercise for you all. If you were impressed by that, if you liked it and you're looking to do additional exercises or to develop exercises, we do encourage you to reach out to Derek Rowan. His email address is right there. He is the president of the organization. Again, we really enjoyed working with them and look forward to working with them again on our next one. I think that might be it for this presentation. Did we have any more questions or other comments from Mark or from Bill, Brian, anything that we may have missed? I guess anybody who's here listening, if you use that Q&A function, just enter in any other questions you may have, requests you may have. I'll be happy to consider those at this time.
I just have one final comment, Chris, about the after action report. We're looking forward to getting that out in the near future, and we're going to include a number of other findings in it that were not included in this presentation, including things, some information around the team composition, the who was leading the events, and other interesting trends that we noticed in the exercise.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Brian. So by the end of next week, we will have the after action review, the full after action review published. It'll be posted on our website. We'll send you links so that you can access it. We'll also provide everyone who participated in the exercise, as well as who are on our summit here today, with certificates of participation or completion, so that they can use that for any kind of continuing education credits that may be eligible to fulfill. So do look for emails following up with this, and especially for that after action review. Like I said, we'll be sending you the link to where you can access that. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, Chris, just as you mentioned, we're hosting a free multi-sector resilience exercise later this year, September 12th and again December 11th. It builds on those learnings from our financial services run. It extends it to disruptions to the payment systems across all sectors. Hundreds of organizations have already signed up. You can register. There's the link that Chris posted in the chat just a few seconds ago. You can also find it at grfbrc.org under the events tab. Yeah, just thanks again to our partner Centra, our sponsors, all of our members who make it possible for us to offer this exercise for free. We really want to build exercise series out. The goal is to have several themes throughout the year that we can build exercises around. I think Bill mentioned the China-Taiwan scenario that we had last year, this payments exercise that we have this year. We want to have multiple exercises over the course of the year available to people, to members, but also in some cases to non-members to join for free. And we want to build modules that organizations can take back to their organization to run through, or you can work with a partner like Accenture or others to run those within your organization. So you can take the learnings from the broader multi-sector iteration, and you can think about it within your organization and how does this impact you directly, and what are the learnings that you get from running it internally. So stay tuned for that. And through your membership, through your partnership, those are how we do these things. So again, please, join us if you can, and ask your vendors and suppliers to also join as well. That's it for me for this session. Chris, I think we can close this one out. And let's, you go to the next slide. We've got about a 15-minute break. Next session will begin at 1 p.m. Eastern. For those of you interested, you can take the time, go to grf.org, look at our events page, and you can find the Summit on Security and Third-Party Risk. I think it's under Summit page. And register for that event. It'll be great. We have about 300 practitioner participants and great speakers. And we're really working to if we've got large cohorts from our different communities, we want to create some individualized sector-specific discussions toward the end of that conference. So reach out to us if you want to try and work through doing that as well. But thanks all. We will close it out for now. We'll be back in about 14 minutes. The Q&A is open still, so if you think of something you hadn't thought of before, go ahead and raise up the question and we will work to respond to you next session at 1 p.m. Thanks.